Hi, I'm fishing on the Warwickshire Avon just upstream of Pershore on the BAA stretch called Cropthorne. And as you can see, I'm playing a pretty decent fish, which I think's a bream. It's actually the fourth fish I've had this morning. And I'm going to take you through some of the tips relating to bream river fishing on venues such as this. Wow, look at that. That bream's probably about £5. It's an absolute monster. So that's the kind of bream I'm talking about. What a wonderful fish from a beautiful section of river. Right, I'll pop him in the net and we'll get stuck into some of the detail. So I've selected this peg, which is in the meadow above the railway bridge at Cropthorne. I love this area because it's quite wide and deep and it looks very, very breamy. The first thing I did when I got here was I just put a bomb on my feeder rod, cast it out, and just to check that the bottom wasn't too snaggy, and this peg's quite clear. There's quite a distinct channel which is quite deep down the middle, probably around about 14 foot deep. So it's a perfect holding area for bream. Once I checked the peg was okay for snags and I got the right depth, I clipped up my bomb and I'm basically fishing just past the middle. And at the start I put in 10 balls of ground bait loaded with casters and hemp. So I want to try and attract the bream in the area into the area where I'm fishing. The ground bait I used for this initial bombardment was a mix of a third brown crumb, a third Sensor's Magic and a third Sensor's Bream. So that's a fantastic mix for bream fishing. And I also like it because you can mix it quite stiff and get the ground bait out to where you want to feed, and also without it breaking up before it hits the bottom. So that feels like another bream, maybe not quite as big as the first one, but a nice one nevertheless. You can see how they really kick. They're powerful bream, river bream. So once I made that initial bombardment, I've just started casting regularly with a medium size Drennan cage feeder. There we go, that's a nice bream. Around about, I'd say £2. Beautiful fit river bream, looks like it's never been caught. Okay, so let's have a look at the tackle I'm using today for this bream session on the Warwickshire Avon. The feeder that I'm using is a Agility 12-foot power feeder that I developed for Shakespeare. As the name suggests, it's a powerful rod that will cast feeders easily up to 4 ounce in weight, so that's 120 grams. But it's also got a nice forgiving action, which is really important when you're hooking and playing bream on a peg such as this. They can kick quite hard and you want a rod that's going to absorb those lunges from the fish without breaking the hook length or pulling the hook out. Moving on to the reel, this is also a new reel for Shakespeare. It's called an Agility, and this is a 35 size in the front drag. The reel comes with a double and a single handle. In this case you can see I'm using the double handle, and it comes with 2 aluminium spools. In this case I'm using the shallow match spool, And I've teamed that up with around about 100 metres of 5 pound trilene sensation feeder, which is a very nice, robust, traditional reel line, if you like, one that's going to take some hammer and prove very reliable. The diameter is around about 0.20 millimetres, which is more than enough for fishing on the river like this today. I'm only going to need to use light feeders. I'm not going to have to cast a long way. So I've gone for a 5 pound trilene sensation feeder. Moving on to the hook length, I've selected the Berkeley XWR in a diameter 0.14 millimetre, which gives me a good breaking strain around about 5 pounds. Obviously this is a high-tech line, it's clear, a very thin diameter for its breaking strain, so I like to use XWR for a lot of my match fishing and course fishing. The hook I'm using is a Drennan B560 and I've started in a size 14. You can see the bait I'm using is 2 bits of worm, 2 halves of worm, tipped off with a caster. So I can see that the size of the hook is pretty much masked by the 2 worms. The caster's just helping to keep the worms away from the point. I like to use quite a big hook whenever I can, so I might consider changing down to a size 12 and maybe putting 3 worms on or multiple baits. You don't want to pull out of the fish, you want a decent hook that's going to hook through the bait and enable you to pull the fish away with some confidence from the rest of the feeding fish. The feeder I'm using is a 28 gram Drennan cage feeder. It's a flat design and I like these because I think they help to sit on the bottom very efficiently, and I can get away with using a slightly lighter feeder than I perhaps would do if I used a normal feeder. So that's the 25 gram medium Drennan feeder. And I've got it on a rig that I really like to use for a lot of my feeder fishing on rivers, which is a bolt rig. I use the feeder that's on a swivel running on top of a loop between 2 gripper stops. And it means that it's quite a positive rig, that the fish, when it picks up the bait, will hopefully hook itself and give me a good positive bite, so that I'm only picking up and bending into the fish when it's hooked rather than scaring off a fish if I'm striking at a line bite. So that's a very positive rig, but one that works well. And to enhance that, I'm using quite a short hook length to start with, around about 2 foot. Again, to enhance the bolt rig. If it was fishing harder, I'd increase that length of hook length, maybe in some cases up to 6 foot, to help present the bait very naturally if the fish are being very cautious and moving away from the feeder. Or I might actually even reduce the length of the hook length, maybe down to 1 foot, if I'm catching a lot of fish and I want to maximise the efficiency of the rig and catch the fish as quickly as possible. So that's a simple feeder rig. I'm casting it perhaps 20 metres to the middle of the river, over the top of the ground bait that I fed at the beginning of the session. Okay, so I'll show you how to make the feeder rig that I'm using today. First of all, you've got to put a gripper stop on the main line and push that up. Then I'll add the swivel. Okay, and then another gripper stop on the bottom. Okay, so I've got the 2 gripper stops and the swivel. Then below that, I'm going to make a large loop. So I guess that's probably about 50 centimetres long. So I'll make the loop and I'll cut off the tag end. And the idea with this rig is that I'll make several loops below where the feeder is going to be situated to help produce a boom effect on that length of line. It helps to reduce the tangles by keeping the hook and hook length away from the feeder. So I've done 4 different loops there. Okay, and then I'll bring down the gripper stops back over onto the top loop, and I'll keep them on top of the knot on both sides. So you can see that the swivel and the feeder, when I attach the feeder, is running on top of that loop between the 2 gripper stops. So that's a very, very effective bolt method for feeder fishing on rivers. Now, if I felt that I was missing bites, I'd actually move the top gripper stop down to reduce the distance between the 2 gripper stops. It's something that you just need to experiment with when you're fishing, when you can actually fix the feeder completely by bringing them both together. And as you can see there, the actual loops will sit proud of the feeder, and I'll just attach my hook length to that bottom loop. So it's a simple rig, but one that's very, very effective, but also safe. Because rather than having the swivel incorporated into the loop, if I were to hook a big fish that snagged up, or if I cracked off the rig, this swivel can pull up and that gripper stop will keep going until it comes off the line. So the fish won't be tethered to the feeder. So there you go, that's my feeder rig. Okay, I thought I'd take you through some tips relating to the bait that I'm using today. So I brought around about half a kilo of Dendrobina worms with me for using both on the hook and also for chopping up and feeding. I brought some casters, which are a great holding bait for bream, that I put in my initial bombardment of ground bait, but also through my feeder in conjunction with the chopped worm. So you can see that I get this mixture of chopped worm and caster. Now you will see that I haven't chopped the worm too finely in this case, because I'm fishing for decent sized fish and hopefully a good amount of them. I do want to actually feed them as well. If the fishing was harder, I might chop them up into a mince to enhance the smell of the worms without actually feeding the fish. I always have some floating maggots with me. In this case I've got bronze with a few reds in. I can use those to tip off the worm, or I can use them on their own, 2 or 3 maggots on the hook. And I like to use floating maggots because I think the fact that they're more buoyant counterbalances the weight of the hook. So I think they behave much more naturally in the water. So this is the mix of ground bait that I'm actually putting through the feeder. It's a lovely, light, fluffy mix that's really attractive for bream, made up of a 1/3 brown crumb, a 1/3 magic, and a 1/3 census bream. And I've actually added a little bit of explosive feeder, which contains a lot of crushed hemp, just to help the mix break down even quicker through the cage feeder. You'll also notice that I've got some dampened microcarp pellets. I like to have these with me whenever I'm fishing on a river such as this. I think it just enhances the ground bait, and sometimes I'll actually just feed pellets, or I'll fish a mixture of ground bait and pellets with the other particles that I'm feeding. So just quickly to show you how I'll load the feeder, I'll load one end with some of the ground bait, then I'll scoop in the chopped worm and caster mix, plug it with a little bit more ground bait. So that means that I'm going to get all that nice chopped worm and caster, which is such a fantastic attractor for bream and most fish actually, down near the bottom. But the ground bait's going to open and disperse very quickly away from the feeder, so that I'm building the peg up gradually. I don't want to be reeling the feeder in and finding that I've got half the feed still in there, so I'm in danger of spreading the feed all over the river. I think that's an important point to mention about why I'm using a cage feeder. Again, a cage feeder will help to release the ground bait and its contents much quicker than a standard feeder with a plastic feeder with holes. Okay, so I'm just about to recast, and I thought I'd just emphasise exactly where I'm fishing in the swim. Basically, when I started, I threw the balls just down the middle, directly in front of me. And I'm going to cast the feeder just past that, and I'm using a clip on my reel to fix the distance. So I'm actually going to cast the feeder past to where it hits the clip, and then the feeder will swing back against the clip over the ground bait that I fed. So it's only a short cast, but I'll cast gently, stop the feeder on the clip, and then lower the feeder down to the bottom, and I know that I'm exactly the same spot every time. The other thing you'll notice is I did feather the feeder when it hit the water, and that's really important because it just reduces the impact of the feeder and the disturbance on the water. So it's nice just to be able to keep casting in the same spot, certainly to start with. After a period of time, I might try and fish around the peg, so I might try a bit further downstream or a bit further over if I feel the fish have backed off from the main feed. Another good tip to think about when you're feeder fishing on rivers is that I've actually got the rod rest angled up, so you can see that some of the line is actually off the water. Well, it's not so critical today because the river's not flowing too hard, but if it were, I'd actually have the rod higher up to keep more line off the water to reduce the drag on the line. If I kept the rod down like as if you were fishing on a still water, you'd have to use a lot more weight in the feeder to keep the feeder on the bottom. So today I've got the rod angled nicely so it's easy to see, and I've also got the rod rest positioned so that once I cast, like I showed you, and the line hits the clip, I can gently put the rod down and it's in a perfect position. Angled slightly downstream of me to enhance the bow, and also in a good position so I can see it easily. I'm not craning my neck up to see the rod if it's too high up. So for me, when the river's not flowing too hard, that's absolutely perfect position for my rod. So there you go, there's another nice bream. I've had a wonderful net of fish now, 5 or 6 big bream and 5 or 6 skimmers plus some perch. I've really enjoyed this session, bream fishing on the River Avon. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I've been fishing on the BAA stretch at Cropthorne on the Warwickshire Avon, just upstream of Pershore. We're going to put the details of the BAA club at the end of the video. And I think you'll agree that there's so many fantastic venues like this that are pretty much untouched now, and the BAA has a fantastic amount to go at. I hope you've enjoyed the video, I hope you've enjoyed the tips and find them useful. Thank you very much.